Hello and welcome to the Armenian News Network, Groong Week in Review. This show is being recorded on March 13, 2022. I'm Asbed Bedrossian, and I'm here with Hovik Manucharyan. Here are the major topics we will touch on today. We will discuss how events around Artsakh are affecting the continuing negotiations between Armenia and Azerbaijan, and Armenia further degrading its strategic relations with Russia and the CSTO. Then we'll discuss the events in neighboring Georgia, where protesters were successful in bringing an about-face by the parliamentary ruling party to strike down a law on foreign agents. Finally, we'll discuss our impressions of the results of a recent MPG poll, which shows shifting perceptions of the Armenian people on various topics. To discuss these topics, we have with us Hrant Mikaelian, a political scientist and multidisciplinary researcher in social sciences based in Yerevan. He's also a senior researcher at the Caucasus Institute. Hello and welcome back to the show, Hrant. Great to have you back.
Hello, Hrant.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Okay, let's delve into our first topic immediately. In Artsakh, the Azeri blockade continues. Today, I think, was day 92. We talk to Gevis Gajian in Stepanakert every few days. We talked to him yesterday, as a matter of fact, to get a take on how things are on the ground over there. As we know, on March 5, Azerbaijan attacked an Artsakh police car in an unprovoked terroristic act. This was probably because Azerbaijan didn't like what they heard from the Artsakh government when they mischaracterized the meeting of the representatives of the two sides as being about integrating Artsakh into Azerbaijan. Artsakh President Arayik Harutyunyan flatly denied this, that his representatives discussed any integration topics. And he said that Artsakh remains on its quest for internationally recognized independence. He said they talked about things like infrastructure and humanitarian issues. However, Harutyunyan also said that those who disagree with his government can try to change the policy within the legal framework provided by the laws of Artsakh. Many interpreted Arayik's statement to be directed at Samvel Babayan, who recently popped up in Artsakh and went on Artsakh public TV to preach cooperation with Azerbaijan by supporting its goal of removing Russians from the region. Some in the opposition in Armenia and Artsakh criticized Harutyunyan's statements for even allowing for a theoretical possibility that there could be forces in Artsakh who would favor integration with Azerbaijan. So the question, Hrant, was Harutyunyan's mention that those political forces who think otherwise than his government should self-organize, win elections, come and take the government and change policy, an Overton window of sorts.
In his latest statements, Harutyunyan has set even softer position. So now he is not that strongly opposing integration issue. And regarding Samvel Babayan, it's also interesting that he mentioned Azerbaijan's 5 principles for resolving a Nagorno-Karabakh issue and Armenian-Azerbaijani issue globally, which implies in reality so-called Azerbaijani territorial integrity. So they don't say it directly, but it's completely on the table. So I think it is dangerous, and I think the fact that Ruben Vardanyan was removed from office is already mentioning that direction has changed, that they are ready to make concessions. And it's also interesting that it's already more than 3 weeks that Ruben Vardanyan is out of office, but still the border is closed. So when Arayik Harutyunyan was releasing Ruben Vardanyan, he said that that it's being done to keep Artsakh's possibility to counteract, so to keep Artsakh's resources, so essentially to open up the road. But then 3 weeks have passed and still the road is closed. What is also noteworthy here is the statement which was made by Toivo Klar, who recently visited Baku, and he said that Azerbaijan has some concerns about security, which they say it's as of Baku, it's Armenia transferring weapons to Artsakh. In reality, this is not true, but the main issue is that Azerbaijan wants that no supplies would be to Artsakh, and then Azerbaijan will be able to forcefully resolve the issue. So Toyvoklar has been convinced in Baku that Azerbaijan's position is legitimate. And here are two issues. First is European Union's approach, because we've heard Scholz's position several weeks ago, that 2 weeks ago, that Artsakh's conflict should be resolved based on both principles, including territorial integrity and right to self-determination. But then this statement was removed from his website. And then we have Toyvoklar's statement. So I think Azerbaijani diplomacy has worked effectively, while Armenian diplomacy has usually failed.
And of course, Toyvoklar later tried to walk back his statement, saying that, I think he tweeted that nothing, in no case should force be employed. Hrant, so there's also some reports that Arek Harutyunyan is meeting with Pashinyan, and when he returned to Stepanakert, there were rumors, at least some media picked up on those rumors, that there was talk of Arek Harutyunyan's resignation. Meanwhile, the Artsakh Parliamentary Committee, I believe on legislative affairs, approved Harutyunyan's proposal on constitutional changes, which would enable the parliament to select a president during the times of martial law in order to replace a vacant presidency. Why are these rumors circulating about Arek Harutyunyan's resignation? Is he truly, do you believe, interested in leaving Artsakh? And initially the rumors were that he was being squeezed out by Ruben Vartanyan, but if so, why would the situation continue since Ruben Vartanyan is no longer there? And who would be a potential replacement in your opinion?
As of now, we basically have two candidacies, and one is Ruben Vartanyan, and another is Samvel Babayan. So, and the selection is clear. Samvel Babayan has already made statements according to which he represents the soft line and the line towards negotiations and even towards integration of Artsakh with Azerbaijan. And Ruben Vartanyan has made clear that he supports a stronger line or stronger stance towards non-alignment, non-integration policy and increasing of local power and improving diplomatic positions and so on. So, in fact, these two confronting powers will fight for authority. And despite the fact that Samvel Babayan has many supporters in Artsakh, historically, let's say, at least 20-25% of population, some political groups and so on. But currently, I think Ruben Vartanyan will be able to gain more support.
This issue about integration with Azerbaijan, I mean, we realize that there is a blockade and people are in dire situation. But from your interactions with people in Artsakh, with experts in Artsakh, or with people who do analysis on Artsakh, how strong do you think the support is among the people, specifically on the policy of integration with Artsakh? I can't even pronounce that. But what do you think?
In reality, there are very few people who can support this. A vast majority does not support any kind of integration with Azerbaijan. But here is an issue. Latest developments showed us that if you present things in other way, so you can manipulate people so that they don't understand what's going on one hand, and which has been done by Armenian politicians and Armenian media during the last years, and it's shown its efficiency, this method. So first of all, people can be manipulated. And the second is that there are some political forces who are ready to do that. And third is that Baku and most probably Ankara, who has prepared this policy, has effectively divided so-called integration process into hundreds of pieces. And in its side, it implies that there is no a real step where you fully integrate. It's a process instead of one movement. So it also does not let people to understand when the point of no return has been passed. And I think on one side we are very close to this point. On another hand, you never know where it in fact is. So right approach would be to perceive any point as such and not let any kind of integration process. For example, now Baku wants the Red Cross office to be moved from Stepanakert to Baku. I mean, why the hell do you want to move the Red Cross office? But in fact, even this small step would decrease Artsakh's authority and increase Azerbaijan's influence. So even this should not happen. Not talking about, I don't know, any other concessions. So here's a problem. People will not support any kind of unification or integration with Azerbaijan, which they understand it will be destruction of Armenian Artsakh, complete destruction, but and complete disaster. But they can be manipulated so they don't understand what is in reality going on. And they can be left out of choice. Until there is a choice, they will never select this option. So this is a problem. People are not, even in Armenia, many say, especially foreign observers, many say that, look, Armenians have elected Nikol Pashinyan in 2021, which means Armenians in Armenia have accepted results of the war. In reality, it's not so. It's not so. We can look at the surveys results, where we can see that people do not accept this war's result, and people do not accept any changes that took place like last year's. Of course, there are some who do, but they are minority. But in these elections, there was no issue like that. For majority in Armenia, the question was either to select one political group or another, and the selection was based on the ground of local politics, domestic politics, not the foreign politics. And so there is a risk that such a contradiction will take place in Artsakh also. But given that Ruben Vartanyan, for example, has good reputation and he is not perceived as corrupt, although Azerbaijan tries to do so, in Azerbaijani media they call him criminal oligarch, which is one of the terms they have invented for Armenian authorities beforehand, and they used it before 2018, for example.
The term is perfect for Ilham Aliyev, of course.
You can only use first part of it, but anyway, there is a problem that they might try to manipulate, but I don't think they will be able in Artsakh. So I don't think, even given all this potential for manipulation, they will be able to win. If anything is dependent on Artsakhis, both in political class and in population.
But Hrant, why does Arayik Harutyunyan want to resign still?
Well, in reality, very few people in the world would like to be on his place, to be frank, because the situation is very, very difficult. First of all, I'm not sure he is trying to resign. Mm-hmm. Maybe he is imitating. To be frank, I don't see that. Maybe there is some change during the last several days, but couple of days before, from what I know, there was not such intention, at least on his side. Yeah, I know there are people in Artsakh, and there are not few. There are rather many who would like him to resign. And this step towards parliament, towards a new president elected in parliament, is, I think, good step, because right now holding an election in Artsakh is impossible. National election. Yeah, so this is good step, because there is no other way to elect a new leader, or even new power, let's say. But at the same time, I'm not sure he's going to go. But even if it is so, it's you can easily find the reason, because Artsakh is in a very difficult situation, and Arayik Harutyunyan as of now has no keys for this situation. He has no solution, and to be frank, very few people would, very little number of people would have this kind of solution to this situation. But Arayik Harutyunyan yet did not find it, and that's why I don't think this presidency as of now is any kind of beneficial for him. So he is maintaining status quo, but also let's take a look at his appointments. Those appointments are indicating that these people who were appointed are generally representing his political group, his patron-client network. So yet I don't see the process of him leaving the power.
Yeah, in fact, I believe just today another indication of the popular view of Artsakh. Just today, the parties in the Artsakh parliament, I believe all of the factions, sent a statement or a call to Armenian authorities, essentially to refrain from undermining the cause of Artsakh's independence, and specifically referring to the 1992 declaration by the president of the Armenian, later became the Armenian parliament, which has, based on different experts, it has the effect of a law, meaning that Armenia should not sign any international statement or make any move that would undermine the self-determination of Artsakh. And last, I guess, news from today was that Hikmet Hajiev, amid news about accumulation of Azerbaijani forces on the border with Artsakh, and we don't know if this is confirmed or not. I guess it's not confirmed yet. Sorry, let me say that again. And the last news for today on this issue is that there are unconfirmed news about accumulation of Azerbaijani forces on the border with Artsakh. Obviously, we are clarifying that, so please take that with a grain of salt. But also, officially, Hikmet Hajiev has invited Artsakh authorities to go to Baku to negotiate reintegration specifically. It will be interesting to see what happens. Hrant, quickly, do you believe that Artsakh authorities will go to Baku? Seeing that, I think both Arayik Harutyunyan and Samvel Babayan are wanted by Azerbaijan.
Well, first of all, if Samvel Babayan will support their approach, I think they will release him easily. So I think it's not a big issue. But also the big issue is the issue of status, which can be discussed there. I hope they will not go, but unfortunately, I cannot fully exclude it. And yes, Azerbaijan is starting the forceful movements. They also attacked Martuni several days ago, 2 days ago, if I'm not mistaken. So they are gathering forces. Previous time, they started gathering military force around Artsakh's current territory. This took place in December 2022. So it was predecessing the blockade. So they are preparing for some movements, yet we don't know which. And I think based on the fact that it was stated by Artsakh's military, I think we can trust these statements that Azerbaijan is gathering force around Artsakh. So I think we are at risk. I hope Russians are monitoring this situation, but I see that in Armenian authorities are not doing anything. There are no statements. Although we can remember a statement by Nikol Pashinyan, which was made on March 5 during meeting with Scholz, during his speech in Germany, during his meetings in Bundestag, if I'm not mistaken. He said that Azerbaijan is preparing for the war. It was even before Azerbaijan's attack on the policemen in Artsakh. Yeah. So it was even before. He said Azerbaijan is gathering force to attack Armenia to hold a new large-scale war. So I think Nikol Pashinyan understands the situation, but he does not react. which is the most important thing.
It's very interesting. From one side of the mouth, they're saying that there is no doubt that Azerbaijan is planning another war, but from the other,
there's no preparation to counter it.
There's no preparation, and they're actually saying that, you know what, they basically, it seems, at least based on what they're saying, they're ready to sign a peace agreement with Azerbaijan based on some vague guarantees from, more vague international community. I don't know what to say.
Let's talk a little bit about that. It was just a few days ago that Security Council Chair Armen Grigoryan stated that Armenia's understanding is that a peace agreement cannot be signed without what he called progress on the Nagorno-Karabakh issue. The question that I have, first of all, is who is Grigoryan's intended audience? Is this statement intended for the domestic audience or Azerbaijan or the West? Who is he talking to with this statement?
I think Armen Grigoryan always talks to the West, or to some his Western counterparts, or maybe some his partners, because his statements are obviously negatively perceived in Armenia, and this statement too is implying that you should resolve Karabakh issue in the framework of Azerbaijan, obviously, and this implies that I know this implies that he is ready to give up. But and maybe to Baku as well, but I don't think it's in any way directed to domestic audience.
So, Hrant, what does quote unquote some progress mean? Does Grigoryan's statement indicate any kind of a shift in Armenia's negotiation strategy or tactics, or is it just posturing?
A couple of days ago, no, probably 2 weeks ago, he also mentioned the 5 points of Azerbaijan. So, I mean, it's not that this statement means that he's ready to give up, but that one means that he's ready to give up the territory. And concerning the some progress, there is some progress. Azerbaijan wanted Ruben Vartanyan out of office, they gained it. They wanted negotiations, they gained it. But it's not some progress. It's basically the whole situation changed, which is expected. And Azerbaijan has set the goal clearly. So either you accept Azerbaijan's approach fully, or you don't have anything. It's Azerbaijan's maximalist approach from the very beginning, even since the 90s. So I don't think anything has changed here. And maybe Armen Grigoryan does not understand this, but I think he does.
And as we mentioned today, in response to Armen Grigoryan's statements and previous Armenian statements about the so-called internationally visible mechanisms for ensuring security, Hikmet Hajiev, Ilham Aliyev's assistant secretary, I don't know what to call him, responded saying Azerbaijan will not discuss issues related to its sovereignty with any third parties, including Republic of Hayastan. And just a quick note, he actually pronounced the word Hayastan and not Armenia. I don't know if the interview was in Azeri Turkish or if it was in Russian. It was reported in, I believe, report.az. But essentially, he uttered like a mispronounced version of the word Hayastan, which I think was meant to denigrate the sort of Armenia status even more. So what now? I mean, it seems like the Armenian government, which I don't think represents the people of Armenia, but they seem to have played every card. They're now in a position of begging to some kind of pretense, some kind of a pretense of negotiations between Baku and Stepanakert in order to sign this, capitulation that they want. But it seems like Azerbaijan is not even willing to budge on that. What happens now?
Obviously, naming Armenia Hayastan is in fact a continuation of Azerbaijan's propagandist policy, which they were holding since mid 2000s at least, and in their newspapers, in their social media, they were naming Armenia Hayastan and stating that Armenians were Turks, while Hay people came from India or something. So, it's this statement implies that they don't fully recognize Armenia, and I think this shows that no, I want to be clear. It's my position, and very strict one, that we should not have any kind of negotiations with Azerbaijan. We should be just preparing for war. Any kind of negotiations with Azerbaijan should just prolongate this no war situation, if possible, for some more days. But we should understand that, yes, there is a new war on the horizon. Yes, it's very likely. Yes, it might start in Artsakh. And yes, it might go to Armenia next. And no, Azerbaijan will not agree with peaceful coexistence with Armenia, even if Armenia pays so-called complete reintegration of Artsakh into Azerbaijan. And we have seen that, because Azerbaijan says the issue is already resolved. They don't recognize any third parties and so on and so forth. So, which means they will not even perceive this as a concession. They will perceive it as something which is given. So only people who do not understand of diplomacy completely can negotiate with Azerbaijan and expect some outcome. But unfortunately, this is the reality. So I think these Azerbaijan statements and propaganda and political moves are showing that there is no room, virtually no room, not even 1 millimeter room for negotiations with Azerbaijan. That's what I can see from his statements, and that's what I can understand from what we see from Azerbaijan's side. And by the way, one more thing: Azerbaijan's propaganda against Armenians, which is governed by Ilham Aliyev, by the president himself, by the whole state apparatus, is in its essence fully Nazi propaganda. It's not just fascism; it's Nazism. It's very close to what Germans were disseminating against Jews. And it's a kind of preparation before the genocide. And by the way, Nikol Pashinyan himself also stated that Azerbaijanis, please say, what do you want? Do you want genocide? But then he continues negotiations with them, probably to help them. I don't know. So anyway, I don't think there is any room for negotiations with Azerbaijan. The only negotiation should be preparation for new war. Either we prepare for war, or the war will happen without our preparations.
Okay, shifting gears a little bit. We've talked a lot on this show about Armenia's relationships with Russia and the CSTO tanking. The latest on this downward spiral was on Friday, when Armenia further downgraded its relationship with the CSTO by declining to assign one of the 3 deputy secretary general positions. The move was criticized by Dikran Abrahamian, an opposition MP who is also on the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Defense and Security. Hrant, what do you think the significance of this move is? Is there a bottom in sight for these degraded relationships with Russia and CSTO?
This move is definitely important, because there are some people who say that Pashinyan's anti-Russian moves are caused by Russia's reaction on Artsakh and Armenia issues. So Russia does not react. Pashinyan is making demarche. So it's just, let's say, a move to show that he is not consent, that he has a problem. But it's not so, especially in this case, because this move changes institutional framework. So it declines the level of relations. It changes institutional framework. So it changes the way countries interact. It is not just, let's say, statement or something. Yeah, if you are not agreeing, you can make a statement. Most probably you should do diplomatic work, and most probably not official one, or at least not public one. But if you are changing the level of relations, if you are changing the way institutions interact, it means that it's your intention. The intention itself is to decrease the level of relations, which is obvious, I think, and it's continuation of the line which was set, yet at least from when they caught Yuri Khachaturov, and Armenia has lost its position of
Secretary General,
leadership. Yeah, Secretary General.
Yeah, and that was back in 2019, I think, right?
It was in 2018. It was late July 2018 or beginning of August 2018.
Well, so if Armenia were to effectively drop out of the CSTO, even if it officially remains in the alliance, the biggest concern is that there's no alternative security framework which it can rely on for its safety. The West operates in the South Caucasus through the arm of Turkey. This is an enemy country, and the same enemy that gave Pashinyan a kick in the butt in 2020 and to whom he cannot refuse any concession. So the CSTO has not been a great deal, I understand, but it is part of the global patchwork of security alliances that keeps a multipolar balance around the South Caucasus. What alternative is this ruling party betting Armenia's future on?
What I see is that there is increased pro-Turkish propaganda in Armenia, and many ways are utilized for it, and especially social networks and the state television. And this propaganda has already brought to some changes in social behavior and in social perceptions. And I think they are preparing for just this scenario to replace Russia by Turkey. And even if it is big issue, even catastrophic for Armenia, I don't think them being taken care. Especially, we have seen that Khachatur Sukiasan and some other politicians and parliament members are supporting this line, and especially in media, Khachatur Sukiasan does this. So, and many people who are connected to him. So I think they are really preparing to that. And of course, there is no West vs Russia option. Yes, there is Russia vs Turkey option. There is some kind of Iranian option, at least partially. There might be some, some other minor options, but EU observers cannot in any way replace a Russian security presence. They can, let's say, to very small extent, they can decrease the level of number of small incidents because, of course, having these observers, Azerbaijan would not like to be caught. Of course, it's obvious who is shooting, but still. But on the other hand, if there is a risk of a large-scale war, 50 non-armed observers cannot do anything and will not do anything, of course.
Hrant, let's switch gears yet again and talk about what's going on in our neighborhood, specifically in Georgia. On March 7, the Georgian parliament voted into law one of the a couple of drafts of a bill that had been circulated for the past few months. The bill was a near exact translation of the US law on the Foreign Agents Registration Act, known as FARA in the US. The law would require political actors to clarify their foreign funding sources and their activities to lobby lawmakers for such with such funding. And the bill passed with 76 out of the 150 votes in the, I guess, Georgia Dream, the Georgian Dream majority-controlled parliament. And it ignited large protests in Tiflis. And on March 9, the parliament remarkably agreed to rescind the law and to release any of the arrested opposition members. As I said, the main backer of the bill was the ruling Georgian Dream Party. The main opponents of the bill, obviously, were the pro-Western opposition parties. What I want to ask, or what I want to start with, Hrant, is, was this a backdown, a victory for the Georgian opposition? And what really happened there? Why did the Georgian ruling party bring forth a bill that they should have, some say, predicted would result in such a backlash?
Well, let's start from the last question, because chronologically it took part first. So why did they bring this bill? First of all, I think there were two trends. One trend is Russia versus West, which created for some countries more room for their maneuver. And we have seen how Chinese, Turks, and other countries have been utilizing these possibilities. Of course, Armenia failed to use this possibility, but Georgians did, and they have increased their level of strategic autonomy. which of course is viewed negatively in the West. Now that's first, and this is one of the steps, because first was Georgia's rejection of imposing sanctions against Russia, which took place yet in February to March 2022. And they have stated that they are not going to open second front because they remember 2008 and so on. Now that's first. And second, and they wanted to use this time for increasing their level of sovereignty, because it's obvious that many countries have influence over Georgia, and they wanted to increase their maneuver and increase the level of sovereignty. And that's first issue. And second is that in reality, foreign influence on Georgia has increased so much that Georgian authorities are not able to make very many steps. They are very dependent politically, and we have seen how they are limited in their abilities to act, even like during this last week, because in reality, if not West's harsh response, people would not gather in the streets. This is very important, because on one side, of course, for some people in Georgia, it is important. Mainly those NGOs who get the foreign assistance. On the other hand, majority of people are not even aware of this law. But we have seen very strong statements on US side, I mean official statements, on EU side, on the side of their local representatives in Georgia, but also in Washington and so on. And I think this caused the people gathering in the streets, and that's why I think these were two confronting trends. So Georgian authorities were afraid that they are losing power over Georgian politics, especially internally. I mean, domestic politics is also very dependent on the West, because many political reforms or social reforms are affected by the foreign influence. Now, that's second issue. So that's why Georgian government wanted to adopt this law. There are some people in Georgia who think that they did it intentionally to have these clashes and to play it out somehow. But I think it's a very weak position, because Georgian authorities have lost in this battle. Now, concerning those who were gathering, I don't think if Georgian authorities have lost, that Georgian opposition, namely Mikhail Saakashvili and his United National Movement Party, have won. Because in reality, they did not win. Even moreover, when there were these protest actions, when the political actors representing opposition were going to the streets, people in the squares, they were asking them to go. They didn't want to be associated with domestic political players at all. Of course, it is a political movement, but it's directed to foreign politics, and people did not want to be associated with local politics or domestic politics. So that's why I think Georgian government has lost this battle, but the Georgian opposition did not.
Hrant, what were the reasons behind such a strong level of opposition to this bill by the West?
I think there were already for quite some time many disagreements between Georgian government and their Western counterparts. And the major issue was the fact that Georgia did not support sanctions against Russia. And also there are many voices, mainly connected to the West, that Georgia should impose a ban on Russian citizens entering Georgia, or at least impose visa for entering Georgia, and impose sanctions and so on. And Georgia did not. So we have seen how Ukrainians supported protest actions in Georgia. And then we've seen that, so it was already existing discontent. And then also, I think the fact that as the West thinks that, well, many actors in the West, especially in the United States, in Washington, they think that they have given Georgia a lot of finance, of support, and Georgia should not play its own game right now. So they are afraid of losing influence over Georgia, and that's why they try to not let this happen. Especially given that current situation in the world, in global politics, in regional politics in Eurasian region, is very emotional for all sides, including the West. So I think this emotional situation background is also important to understand this perception, because in reality this para-like law, which was adopted by Georgians, or which they tried to adopt, it's more like Australian war law or Hungarian law, but not Russian law or even American one. It's more similar to Hungarian law, and that's why they wanted to prevent creation of another Hungary, which is inside the West but is Eurosceptical. So it's also very important.
Hrant, the tactics the opposition used in Georgia really raised some eyebrows. On live TV, we saw protesters throw Molotov cocktails at the police. We saw them breaking public benches in order to basically make makeshift barricades, and they flipped over cars, to name a few of the things that we saw. Yet we all heard Yet all we heard from Western politicians were calls for the Georgian government to ensure the right of the protesters to protest peacefully. Meanwhile, there are two examples of protests where the West essentially supported the government against the protesters, which were most peaceful. One of the protests was on Moldova recently, where the opposition was criticized by the West. And then, of course, we also remember the resistance movement protests in Yerevan last summer, where some of the Western representatives even criticized the Armenian opposition for being too violent, despite the protests there being nowhere near violent as we saw in Georgia. So what is the difference between the cases of Georgia versus Moldova and Armenia? Why did the protesters in Georgia succeed when the protesters in Armenia didn't?
I think here we need to be clear, and that's what I'm going to do. So in reality, you are raising issue about the double standards being used by Western politicians and diplomats. And unfortunately, it's here. Western actors, especially in Washington, but also in Brussels, have very similar agenda, and it's very political and ideological. Why they did support Georgian movement and they did not support, for example, Armenian or Moldovan, and even did the opposite, and why in Armenia government is acting violently and gets support of the West, or in Moldova, but in Georgia it's opposition. It's because they have this so-called Cold War style thinking, and in reality we have effective revitalization of the Cold War, but in this case only from one side. Yes, Russia is fighting militarily, but it's not playing Cold War yet. At least it's not able. So in reality, when we see the West confronting Russia in this region or somewhere else, mainly we see only Western actors acting. Again, in Armenia, in Moldova, people who were opposing government in Moldova, they were not pro-Russian. They were anti-government, or maybe even anti-Western to some extent, but they were not pro-Russian. So in reality, we see this, and the same situation is worldwide. So we see one side, it's Western side, and we see those who are opposing, but we don't see the second side, so-called Russian, as I said, Russia Gate in the United States, where Russia is interfering everywhere against everyone and so on. But in reality, it's not happening. So in reality, there is no Russia. There is no second side. So this is an issue where where there is one side in every kind of contradiction in the world which gets support, and its support is based not on the law, neither on human rights issue or other issues, but purely political on one side, but there is no second side, which is very important. So here in Georgia, it was the same. So opposition would not win if not political support from the West. I think it's very important to say, because even people gathering in the streets, and by far there will be, I'm sure that there will be much lesser people in the streets, if not direct support. But even with people gathering in the streets, it doesn't mean that they would win. But they won because of these clear political statements, because Georgia has ambitions to join European Union, and I think with this law they could fail, and also there have been statements on official level that that US might sanction Georgian politicians who have voted for this law. So maybe they have been afraid, and I think this is the biggest part of the reason. Not people who gathered in the streets, because it's political, and this is important.
But the other thing that I want to tease out here, and there have been calls in the past that if there was only more decisive moves that the Armenian opposition employed during last summer, basically they blame the opposition for not employing more decisive moves. And I'm not one here to make calls for violence or what we saw in Georgia, but is it possible that the Georgian opposition was more decisive and they used force, and that's why they were successful?
I don't think so, to be frank. And I don't think that Armenian opposition's issue is, or reason of failure is that they were not decisive. Of course they were not, but this is not main reason for failure. In fact, if we compare these two cases, the reason is foreign interference on one side and against other side. Because we've seen during the last several years, we have seen the publications in the Western human rights protection organizations that the only threat to free speech in Armenia is that some opposition groups still have influence in media, and there have been investigations against opposition media. There have been push against opposition media. They have been left out of advertisement money and so on. So in reality, the push against opposition media, against free speech, was supported by the West. It's pity, but it's so. And then let's think why it happened. Yeah, because one side declared that they will support the West, and they don't care what is the policy behind it. You can remember this statement about samosa, or about some other people in Africa or in Latin America. So unfortunately, it's essentially the same policy. Now, concerning Armenian opposition, even despite the fact that there was contradiction on the side of EU, obviously, the reason of failure, first of all, opposition should be seeking in itself. And the reason is that most people in opposition were contradicting each other much more than the authorities. So they were not able to unite. One, there was lack of leadership. Two, third, they did not have strategic agenda. Three, and four, they did not have any clear action plan. So it's not issue of being violent. Yeah, you should be decisive, but not necessarily violent, by far not necessarily. But yeah, of course you should be decisive, but again, you should not be violent to win. You should know what to do if you are willing to win. And this I have not seen on Armenian opposition side. But again, I don't see Georgian opposition winning in these clashes last week. I see Georgian government losing, but not Georgian opposition winning, because protest actions were organized by not by the opposition, but by the NGOs.
So to cover the last topic today, last week a new MPG poll was released called AmotiSar because I guess they focused on some issues related to AmotiSar.
Hovik, can we take just a small break and say what AmotiSar means? It means a mountain of shame.
Yes, so a mountain of shame. And this is just the editorializing of the MPG director, Armenia Azerbaijan. But the questions inside are more interesting, and obviously they claim to follow a standard methodology of doing polls. They did telephone polls of about 1,100 people. Plus or minus 3% is the error margin, and the questions were conducted between February 25 and February 28, so over a duration of 3 days over all of Armenia. Hrant, are there any specific questions or interesting tidbits that you would like to call out from this poll?
Since there were not very many questions, I would pass through a couple of them. First of all, there was a question, how did the corruption level change after the revolution of 2018? And it's interesting that despite the fact that majority, about 60% said that the level of corruption has decreased, there were 32 or a bit more percent who said it has increased. And it's interesting because government propaganda is day by day showing that they are still combating against corruption, against the previous government and so on. But still, very many people think that the corruption level has increased. And moreover, the level of number of people who are thinking that the level of corruption has increased is much bigger than those who are supporting the opposition. So it's not that opposition is confronting the government narrative, because we've seen some narratives of the government supported much wider. For example, aid to Turkey had, according to this poll, had almost 66% support. So, so in this case, we see that on one side, the governmental propaganda has worked effectively, but on the other hand, we see that in another case it did not work, although government is much more pushing towards its anti-corruption image. So it's interesting. Another interesting point is that majority of institutions have rather low level of support and trust, and it includes most of state services and also media. It's also interesting. And the last thing
on that question, it's interesting that or the, I guess, patrol, the police patrol, the new police. Some say the police, the American police, because they were funded. These reforms were funded by the U.S. Has the lowest trust on that poll. Any indication of why that's the case? Because there seems to be a lot of funding and a lot of propaganda to make them look good.
Yeah, but we have seen very weak personnel, and I think this is the biggest part of the reason. And the personnel is really weak, untrained. Maybe in some time it will improve, but yet they are not very effective. And despite the fact that crime rate has decreased last year, because it has increased in 2018 and again in 2020 to 2021, and it's still much higher than in 2017. But at the same time, the trend is improving. So I think in some time the police might increase its popularity, but yet it's not that effective, and it's not matching the expectations of the population, obviously. But there is another story. People were asked do people support the official version, which was publicized by Nikol Pashinyan about incident in Gerarkunik Mars where 15 servicemen have died because of the fire, and a bit more than 70% said they don't trust, and a bit less than 20% or even 19% said they do trust. So it's as of now, I think the lowest support level to authorities in any question which have been put so far in last 5 years. That's very interesting.
And just to remind our listeners, hours after the incident happened, hours after those 15 unfortunate deaths, Pashinyan went on record on public TV and said that he basically detailed the exact sort of incident, how it happened, exactly how the gasoline tank was thrown and so forth, and he made it sound like everything was discovered about that case, when in reality, we're seeing now different versions of events, different people retracting what they said on public TV, including the different public officials. Yeah, so definitely it's interesting to see that so few people support the official narrative now. Can we extrapolate people's support for the government based on the responses to this question?
No, I think it's regarding the specific issue, but it's also important to note that many people in Armenia cannot split these two things: their support of government and their support of any action of government. So very many people, usually the government has around 35% of support right now, and usually this 35% or so support government in any occasion, and there are some 35% who oppose government in any occasion, and the rest are aligning to this or that side. But now for example, now we have seen how majority has shifted in support of AmotiSar, AmotiSar mine, gold mine, whereas previously the public opinion has been split, but now majority supports it. Maybe it's because Armenia has lost SOTK, maybe for some other reason, but as of now, majority is supporting according to this poll. So it also does not indicate that majority is supporting government. So I would say generally level of trust in government and generally level of support towards this government has been decreasing. It's very slow trend, but it's still on. It's ongoing, and it did not stop. And based on some issues, people might shift their opinion towards this or that issue, but again, people are gradually losing trust that they will live better, because still after 2018 there were many people who thought that this government will take dozens of billions, which according to them had the previous government, and disseminate among people, and people did not get out of these virtual billions anything. So it also affects public expectations and opinions.
And of course, also many people talk about the NGOs or the so-called civil society, which I guess they were busy in Georgia protesting the Georgian government because they were nowhere to be seen when this new, AmotiSar decision was announced. What is the cause of that? Did the facts about environmental issues change? Did their beliefs change?
It's interesting that you can find in media that they have made a couple of statements against. There have been some talks against, but this time they try to not publicize it much. So in reality, it's not that their opinion has changed, rather they are trying to not harm the government. And now, since this government is much more vulnerable, and given the fact that they are in fact allies, I think this is the real reason for them not being heard this time. And by the way, you've mentioned Georgian events. It's also noteworthy that they openly, some of Armenian NGOs, they openly supported Georgian protesters.
Yes.
I don't know why they did not support Armenian protesters or Moldovan protesters, but yes, they supported Georgian protesters.
All right. As usual, I'd like to ask each of you if there's been something on your mind this past week that you would like to talk about. Hovik, can I pick on you first?
So one thing I guess I would like to bring up is that we talked about corruption today. There is more and more evidence of corrupt practices of this Armenian government. For instance, about 10 people are currently under arrest for misappropriating money that was directed towards COVID response. And we all know who was the Minister of Health during that time, Artsakh Bedrossian, who is walking free, but his deputy at the time has been arrested. And it just seems like a very large web of corruption. At least that's what the allegations show. And but I'm surprised that Artsakh Bedrossian is still walking free. But also, I'm not surprised because it's this government. So that's my rant.
Okay, Hrant, what's on your mind?
Well, I can add up a couple of things to that. We can remember David Sarnasayan's case, where he found guilty for corruption, but they did not arrest him, or they released him very soon. And also they arrested his deputies and so on. So very similar story. And we have seen lots of publication in media around this issue. So yeah, there are corrupt practices. But unfortunately, there are many people who are investigating corruption, who are still investigating corruption of the previous authorities on cases that took place in like 2006 and so, but not investigating the situation which is taking part today.
All right, we're going to leave it there for today. Thank you, Hrant, for joining us. We really appreciate the time you give us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hrant.
And that concludes our program for this episode of Groong Week in Review. We hope it has helped your understanding of some of the issues from this previous week. We look forward to your feedback and suggestions for issues to cover in greater depth. Contact us on our website at groong.org, that's Groong, and on our Facebook page, ANN-Groong, or in our Facebook group, Groong-Armenian News Network. Special thanks to Laura Osborne for providing the music for our podcast. I'm Hovik Manucharyan, and on behalf of everyone in this episode, I wish you a good week. Thank you for listening, and talk to you next week.